A janitor plays Chopin for a mysterious heartbroken woman, unaware she is the cold-hearted CEO of the company he works for. You should know your place. The rain hammered down on the glass roof of the Vance Enterprises skyscraper like 1,000 desperate fists, a relentless and wild assault against the sterile silence within. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the vast, cavernous office of the CEO for a split second before darkness swallowed it whole, leaving only the soft, amber hue of a single desk lamp to push back against the oppressive gloom. Isabella Vance stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette of impeccable tailoring and profound loneliness, her gaze lost in the storm-tossed city below. The polished marble floor reflected the flickering lights of distant traffic, making it seem as if she were standing on a shattered sky. She felt nothing. Elias pushed his janitorial cart down the deserted corridor on the 50th floor, the gentle squeak of its wheels the only sound to accompany the rhythmic slosh of water in his bucket. The fluorescent lights above cast a cold, sterile glow on the polished floors, each gleam a testament to his thankless labor. A world away from the golden light spilling from the CEO's office at the end of the hall. He moved with a quiet dignity, his shoulders slightly stooped not from fatigue, but from the unbearable weight of a life lived on the precipice of despair. His uniform, worn but clean, felt like a second skin, a constant reminder of his station. In his pocket, a crumpled piece of paper, a doctor's bill for his daughter, Lily, felt heavier than a block of lead. It was another final notice, another stark reminder of the ticking clock that governed his existence. Lily's breath had been shallow that morning, her small face pale against the threadbare blanket he tucked around her chin. Her illness was a creeping fog, slowly dimming the light in her innocent eyes, and every dollar he earned was a desperate, insufficient defense against it. He worked 2 jobs, this one at night and another during the day, his life a blurry cycle of exhaustion and worry, but it was never enough. The world of Vance Enterprises was a universe of sleek surfaces and hushed power, a place where men and women in crisp suits decided the fates of thousands with the soft click of a pen. To them, he was invisible, a ghost who emerged after dark to erase the traces of their important days. He did not begrudge them their success. He only wished for a small piece of security, a single moment where his heart didn't pound with the biting cold of fear every time he thought of Lily's fragile future. He was a good man trapped in a desperate corner, his spirit slowly being ground down by the relentless machinery of survival. Yet, within him, a quiet resolve remained, a steady flame that refused to be extinguished. He would not falter. For Lily, he would endure anything. For Lily, he would be unbreakable. Isabella turned from the window, the city lights blurring through the unshed tears that glistened in her eyes. Tonight was the anniversary. 5 years. 5 years since the sterile silence of a hospital room had replaced the vibrant sound of Richard's laughter. 5 years since the world had splintered into a million sharp pieces, leaving her with nothing but a cavernous mansion, a sprawling empire, and a heart hollowed out by grief. She walked to her ornate desk, her fingers tracing the silver frame of a photograph. Richard, his smile impossibly bright, his arm around her. They were at a concert, their faces glowing with a shared, unspoken joy. He had loved music. He had loved Chopin. The nocturnes were his favorite. Pieces, he said, were like whispers from the soul. He used to play for her on their old upright piano, his long fingers dancing across the keys, filling their small apartment with a sound so tender it felt sacred. Now, the grand piano in their stately home sat shrouded in a dust cover, a silent, imposing monument to all she had lost. The company, Vance Enterprises, had been his dream. After he was gone, she had thrown herself into it, building it into a global powerhouse with a ruthless efficiency that stunned her competitors. She had donned a suit of armor, becoming the cold, commanding CEO everyone saw, a woman of sharp angles and sharper words. It was a perfect disguise. No one could see the shattered woman underneath, the woman who still woke up reaching for a hand that wasn't there, the woman for whom every beautiful melody was now a source of unbearable pain. The silence of her office pressed in on her, thick and suffocating. A sob caught in her throat, a raw, ragged sound she quickly choked back. She would not cry. Crying was a weakness she could no longer afford. She needed to walk, to move, to escape the confines of this room that was both her kingdom and her cage. She strode out into the hallway, her heels clicking softly on the marble, and wandered into the adjacent grand ballroom, a vast, dark space kept for formal events. It was empty, the chairs stacked against the wall, the air thick with the scent of floor polish and disuse. At the far end of the room, on a raised dais, sat a magnificent grand piano, its polished black surface gleaming even in the faint light filtering in from the corridor. She froze. Elias had seen the woman leave her office. He hadn't known who she was, only that she wore clothes that cost more than he made in a year and that her posture radiated a brittle, almost fragile power. He had been about to turn his cart down another wing when he saw her stop in the entrance to the ballroom. He saw her shoulders, how they trembled for just a second, a tiny, almost imperceptible shudder that spoke of a grief so profound it shook her to her core. In that fleeting moment, she was not a powerful executive. She was just a person, drowning in a sea of unspoken sorrow. His heart, already heavy with his own troubles, ached with a sudden, sharp pang of empathy. He knew that kind of loneliness. He knew the silence that screamed louder than any noise. His wife, Maria, had been a musician. She had filled their tiny apartment with music, her fingers flying over the keys of the second-hand piano he'd saved for months to buy her. When she got sick, and the music stopped, the silence had been the cruelest symptom of all. After she was gone, he taught himself to play, note by painful note, using her old sheet music. He played for Lily, gentle lullabies to soothe her fevers. He played for himself, to remember the feeling of Maria's hand in his. He played to fill the silence. He looked at the woman standing in the doorway, a lost soul in a sea of shadows. He hesitated. This was not his place. He was the janitor. He was invisible. To approach her, to speak, would be a transgression, a violation of the unspoken rules that govern this world. But then he looked at the grand piano on the stage. An idea, wild and reckless, took hold. What if he didn't use words? What if he used the only language he knew to speak to the soul? It was a risk, a terrible, foolish risk that could cost him the job he so desperately needed. He could be fired on the spot. But the image of her trembling shoulders, the memory of his own crushing grief, it all pushed past the fear. His goodness, his inherent, selfless compassion, overcame his caution. He pushed his cart silently into a nearby alcove, out of sight, and slipped into the ballroom from a side entrance, his worn rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the polished floor. She did not see him. Her back was still to the stage. With a heart pounding in his chest, he walked up the steps to the dais and sat down on the piano bench. The ivory keys felt cool and smooth beneath his calloused fingertips. He took a deep, steadying breath, closed his eyes and thought of Maria. Then he began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Op. 9 No. 2, fell into the vast silence of the ballroom. They were not perfect, not technically flawless like a concert pianist. They were something more. They were tender, raw, and imbued with a sincerity so pure it was heartbreaking. Each note was a teardrop, each chord a quiet sigh of longing and acceptance. The music was a balm, a gentle hand on a fevered brow. Isabella froze. Her breath caught in her chest, a sharp gasp that was swallowed by the melody. That song. It was their song. Richard's song. For a dizzying second, she thought she was losing her mind, that her grief had finally conjured a ghost to torment her. But the music was real. It filled the cavernous space, echoing off the marble and glass, wrapping around her like a warm blanket on a cold night. It was the most achingly beautiful rendition she had ever heard, played not with arrogance or for performance, but with a deep personal understanding of its soul. Spoke of loss, yes, but it also spoke of love that endured beyond that loss. The music seemed to see right through her armor, to touch that shattered place inside her she kept hidden from the world. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. Then another. The seismic shock of the moment, the sheer, impossible kindness of it, cracked open the icy dam she had built around her heart. She turned slowly, her eyes wide, trying to see who was creating this miracle. Through her shimmering vision, she could just make out the silhouette of a man at the piano, his head bowed, his form indistinct in the deep shadows of the stage. He was completely absorbed in the music, pouring every ounce of his own hidden pain and love into the keys. It was a sacred offering, a gift from one wounded soul to another, given freely and without expectation. The final, gentle notes of the nocturne hung in the air, shimmering for a moment before fading into silence. The silence that returned was different. It was no longer oppressive, but soft, peaceful, and filled with the ghost of a profound connection. Before Isabella could speak, before she could even find her voice to whisper thank you, the man stood up and vanished into the shadows at the back of the stage. He was gone. She stood alone in the quiet ballroom, the echo of the music still vibrating in her very bones, a feeling of awe and wonder reawakening a part of her she thought had died forever. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know why he had done it. But she knew, with an undeniable certainty that shook her to her core, that this moment had changed everything. She had to find him. The next morning, the sterile efficiency of Vance Enterprises was shattered by a minor scandal. Marcus Thorne, a senior vice president with a gleaming smile and eyes as cold as polished steel, strode into Isabella's office holding a tablet like a weapon. His ambition was a poorly concealed secret, his every move calculated to undermine her and elevate himself. "Isabella," he began, his voice laced with a theatrical concern that set her teeth on edge. "We have a security breach." A rather unusual 1-inch. He placed the tablet on her desk, displaying a grainy security video. It showed the grand ballroom, dark and empty, and then a figure, clearly a janitor in his uniform, walking onto the stage and sitting at the company's prized Steinway piano. The video had no sound, but Isabella's heart thudded in her chest. It was him. "He played it," Marcus said, his lip curling in disdain. "For nearly 5 minutes. An absolute violation of protocol. This instrument is for board-approved functions only, handled by professionals. To have some cleaner putting his grimy hands all over it. It's a disgrace." Isabella kept her expression a mask of cool indifference, though inside, a strange mix of anger and protectiveness was stirring. She knew she should be angry at the breach, but all she felt was a fierce urge to defend the anonymous musician. "Identify him," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. Within the hour, Elias was standing before them in the same office where she had wept the night before. He stood with his quiet dignity, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze steady. He looked tired, the skin around his eyes hollow and shadowed, but there was no fear in them, only a weary resignation. He knew why he was there. He had known the risk. He looked at Isabella, the powerful CEO, and felt a flicker of recognition. Was she the woman from the ballroom? In the harsh light of the office, she looked different, colder, more intimidating. He couldn't be sure. Marcus circled him like a shark. "Do you have any idea the value of that instrument?" he sneered. "It costs more than you'll make in a lifetime. What gave you the right to touch it?" Elias's gaze remained unwavering. "I'm sorry, sir. It was a lapse in judgment." He would not explain his reasons. He would not cheapen the moment by trying to justify it to this cruel, arrogant man. That act of kindness was a private, sacred thing. He would accept the consequences in silence. "A lapse in judgment?" Marcus laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You're fired." "No." Isabella's voice cut through the air, sharp and decisive. Marcus froze, turning to her in disbelief. "Isabella, the precedent." "He is not fired," she repeated, her eyes fixed on Elias. A storm of conflict raged within her. Revealing that she was the reason for his transgression was impossible. It would expose a vulnerability she could not afford to show, especially not to Marcus. But she could not let this man, this gentle soul who had given her such an incredible gift, be cast out because of it. "He will receive a formal warning and a 1-week suspension without pay," she declared, the words feeling like ash in her mouth. It was a compromise, a way to appease Marcus and uphold corporate policy without destroying Elias completely. But as she saw the flicker of pain in Elias's eyes at the mention of lost pay, she felt a sharp pang of guilt. For him, a week's pay was not a minor inconvenience. It was a catastrophe. It was food off his daughter's table. It was a step closer to the abyss. He simply nodded. "I understand. Thank you, ma'am." He turned and walked out of the office, his back straight, his quiet dignity a stark rebuke to the power games being played around him. Isabella watched him go, a profound sense of failure washing over her. She had saved his job, but she had still punished him. The separation was now complete and brutally reinforced. He was the janitor on suspension, and she was the CEO who had just made his desperate life even harder. Total silence. A renewed purpose took root in the barren soil of Isabella's heart. The guilt over Elias's suspension was a physical weight, a constant, nagging presence. She had acted to protect her own position, her own emotional armor, at his expense. It was the kind of transactional, self-serving decision she had built her career on, and for the first time, it filled her with a deep and abiding self-loathing. The memory of his music, that pure, selfless offering, stood in stark contrast to her own cowardice. This man, who had nothing, had given her everything he had in that moment. And she, who had everything, had given him nothing but more hardship in return. She would not let it stand. The feeling that had awakened in the ballroom, awe, intrigue, a flicker of hope, now solidified into a firm, unwavering resolve. She would find a way to repay him, not just for the music, but for reminding her of a part of herself she thought was gone forever. Her methods were swift and discreet. The CEO of Vance Enterprises had access to information and resources that could move mountains with a single command. She initiated a confidential internal review, citing a need to update employee files. Within a day, she had Elias's entire life laid out before her on a secure server. His address, his employment history, and the heartbreaking details of his daughter, Lily, and her battle with a rare autoimmune disorder. She saw the stacks of unpaid medical bills, the reports from doctors, the crushing financial burden he carried with such quiet grace. Her chest tightened. This wasn't just a man struggling to get by. This was a father fighting a desperate war for his child's life. The man who had soothed her soul-deep grief was carrying a burden 100 times heavier than her own. The knowledge was a seismic shock. Her own pain, which had felt so all-consuming, suddenly seemed self-indulgent in the face of his quiet, unrelenting courage. He wasn't just a virtuous sufferer. He was a hero in a worn-out janitor's uniform. That evening, she made a series of untraceable wire transfers from a private philanthropic fund she had established years ago in Richard's name, a fund she had never used. The instructions were simple and anonymous. All of Elias's outstanding medical debt was to be cleared. An appointment was to be scheduled for Lily with Dr. Alistair Finch, the world's leading specialist in pediatric immunology, with all associated costs covered indefinitely by an anonymous benefactor. Elias received the letter from the hospital 2 days later. He was in his small, sparsely furnished apartment, making Lily a simple broth for dinner. The official envelope felt ominous, and he opened it with trembling hands, expecting another demand for payment he couldn't meet. He read the first line, then read it again, his mind refusing to process the words. "Your account balance is 0. It went on to explain that an anonymous donor had cleared his entire debt and established a fund for Lily's ongoing treatment, including consultations with Dr. Finch in the city. Elias sank into a chair, the letter shaking in his hand. His legs gave out from under him. A single, hot tear fell onto the crisp paper, then another. A sob, thick with disbelief and a cathartic, overwhelming relief, broke from his throat. He covered his face with his hands and wept, the raw, shuddering sounds of a man who had been carrying an unbearable weight for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. It felt like divine intervention, a miracle dropped from the heavens into his desperate life. He didn't know who had done it or why. He just knew that for the first time in years he could breathe. For the first time in years, he could see a flicker of real, tangible hope for his daughter. He was safe. Isabella knew she couldn't leave it at that. The anonymous charity felt hollow, another transaction from a distance. She needed to see him, to know the man behind the music, the father behind the quiet hero. She craved connection, not just the satisfaction of wielding her power for good. When his suspension ended, she began to orchestrate encounters. She stayed late at the office, wandering the quiet, empty halls of the 50th floor, waiting for the soft squeak of his cart. The first time he saw her, he froze, his hand tightening on the handle. He expected a reprimand, another reminder of his place. But she just offered a small, hesitant smile. "Good evening," she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "Good evening, ma'am," he replied, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes cast downwards. "Please," she said, a hint of pleading in her tone. "Call me Isabella." The conversation started slowly, brief exchanges in the sterile silence of the corridors. She would ask about his evening. He would give quiet, sincere answers. He was shy and used to being seen, truly seen, by anyone in this gleaming tower, let alone its queen. But Isabella was patient. She saw the gentle soul behind his reticence, the deep well of kindness in his weary eyes. One night, she found him in the small staff break room, carefully pouring hot water into a cup with a faded cartoon character on it. "For your daughter?" she asked gently, stepping into the flickering light of the room. He nodded, a soft smile touching his lips for the first time. "It's her favorite cup. I bring her a thermos of chamomile tea when I get home. It helps her sleep, a simple act, yet it spoke volumes of his tender, unwavering devotion." Isabella felt her heart ache with a sweet, unfamiliar pang. She found herself making excuses to talk to him, bringing 2 cups of tea from her office and offering him one, claiming she'd made too much. They sat in the quiet break room, the chasm between CEO and janitor slowly being filled by a fragile, unspoken understanding. This was their confession scene, unfolding over several nights in the quiet intimacy of the deserted office. He told her about Maria, about her love for music and the crushing silence she had left behind. He spoke of how he learned to play Chopin not for fame or skill, but to keep her memory alive for himself and for Lily. "The music," he said, his voice soft. "It's like her whisper. Still here with me." Isabella listened with unwavering eyes, her gaze steady and full of an empathy that made him feel truly seen. She didn't offer empty platitudes or condolences. She simply listened, creating a safe harbor for his grief. Then it was her turn. She told him about Richard. She spoke of his laughter, his dreams, and his love for the very same nocturnes Elias played. "The night you played in the ballroom," she confessed, her voice cracking slightly. "It was the anniversary of his death. I thought I was hearing a ghost." Elias looked at her, his eyes wide with stunned comprehension. He finally understood. The sad woman in the doorway, the powerful CEO, and the grieving widow were all the same person. "I heard the music he loved, played with the same heart," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me back a piece of him that night. A piece of myself." A sacred bond was forged between them in that dimly lit room. A bond of shared grief, of shared music, of 2 lonely souls who had found an unexpected mirror in one another. He was no longer just the janitor, and she was no longer just the CEO. They were Elias and Isabella, 2 people connected by a strange, beautiful, and undeniable twist of fate. The annual Vance Enterprises Charity Gala was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar. A night of gleaming jewels, crisp tuxedos, and the subtle, brutal theater of corporate power. The grand ballroom, where Elias had played his solitary concert, was now transformed, dripping with crystal chandeliers and filled with the murmur of 100 conversations. Isabella moved through the crowd, a vision in a midnight blue gown, her smile polite but her eyes searching. She had invited Elias, not as a janitor but as her personal guest. He had refused at first, terrified and overwhelmed, but she had insisted gently, arranging for a tailored suit to be delivered to his apartment. He stood near the edge of the room now, looking profoundly uncomfortable but also impossibly handsome, the simple, elegant suit highlighting his quiet dignity. He felt like an imposter, a crow in a flock of peacocks. Marcus Thorne had been watching them all night. He had noticed the clandestine meetings, the shared cups of tea, the way Isabella's eyes softened whenever she looked at the cleaner. It enraged him. It was an affront to the natural order of things. He saw Isabella's quiet attention to the janitor not as a curiosity, but as a threat to his own ambitions, a sign of weakness in her leadership. He decided, with a surge of cold, calculated cruelty, to put an end to it. He would humiliate the janitor so thoroughly that Isabella would have no choice but to cast him out, re-establishing the proper, ruthless hierarchy he understood. He picked up a tray of champagne flutes from a passing waiter. With practiced ease, he maneuvered himself near a particularly powerful investor, Mr. Harrington, who was speaking with Elias. Marcus stumbled, sending the entire tray of champagne crashing down the front of Harrington's expensive suit. Gasps echoed through the room. Marcus immediately rounded on Elias, his voice ringing with theatrical fury. "You clumsy oaf!" he shouted, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger. "Look what you've done. This is a multi-billion-dollar investor. Men like you should know their place, scrubbing toilets in the basement, not mingling with your betters and getting underfoot." The music screeched to a halt. A heavy, shocked silence fell over the ballroom. Every eye was on Elias. He stood there, drenched in champagne, his face pale with shock and shame. He remained dignified, his back straight, but his hands were clenched into tight fists at his sides, his knuckles white. He was overwhelmed, trapped in a nightmare of public humiliation. "Get him out of here," Marcus snarled at the security guards, who began to move forward. "He doesn't belong here." Elias braced himself, ready to be dragged away like a common criminal. He closed his eyes. But then, a voice, calm and as clear as a bell, cut through the tense silence. "He belongs with me." Isabella stepped forward, her movement fluid and commanding. The crowd parted for her as if by instinct. She stopped directly in front of Marcus, her eyes not angry, but filled with a chilling, absolute power. She looked at the stunned investor. "Mr. Harrington, my sincere apologies. Vance Enterprises will, of course, cover the cost of 1,000 of your finest suits." "Marcus," she said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper, "you are fired. Your access has been revoked. Security will escort you from the building." Now Marcus's jaw dropped. He sputtered, speechless, as the guards, changing their course, moved to flank him. Isabella paid him no more attention. She turned to the crowd, her voice rising to fill the cavernous hall. "This man," she said, her gaze finding Elias, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, "is Elias. And you are right, Marcus, he is a janitor. He is also the kindest, most decent, and most honorable man I have ever met." She began to tell them everything. She told them of the anniversary of her husband's death, of her profound grief, and of the anonymous man who played Chopin in the dark, not for applause, but to soothe a stranger's pain. "That music," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "saved a part of my soul. I have been searching for a way to repay him ever since." She then revealed that she was the anonymous benefactor who had paid for his daughter's medical care. A collective gasp went through the room. "So no," she said, turning back to Elias, her expression softening into one of raw, tender vulnerability. "He does not belong in the basement." She walked to the magnificent grand piano, the stage of their first, anonymous encounter, and rested a hand on its polished surface. She looked at him, a promise shining in her eyes. "His place is here," she smiled, a true, radiant smile. "Play for me, Elias. Play Chopin for me, and I promise you, I will fall for you all over again." Elias stood frozen, the world tilting on its axis. The public humiliation, the sudden, shocking defense, the grand, public revelation of her identity and her secret kindness. It was too much to comprehend. He looked at Isabella, standing by the piano, her heart in her eyes, offering him not just salvation, but a throne. The sneering faces of the crowd had been replaced by expressions of awe, sympathy, and profound respect. The power dynamic of the entire room, of his entire life, had been irrevocably shattered and remade in that single cathartic moment. He walked toward the piano as if in a dream, his steps unsteady. The champagne dripping from his suit jacket seemed like a remnant from another life. He sat on the bench, the same bench where he had risked everything for a stranger, and looked out at the sea of faces. But he only saw her. Isabella. He placed his calloused fingers, the fingers of a working man, a father, a widower, on the cool ivory keys. He took a breath and then he played. It was not the gentle nocturne from that first night. It was Chopin's Polonaise in A-flat major. The music exploded into the silent hall. A powerful, commanding declaration of strength, of survival, of a spirit that had endured the unbearable and emerged not broken, but triumphant. It was the sound of his own quiet resilience finally given a voice, a roar that had been building in the silent chambers of his heart for years. The music was his story. It was the hardship, the fear for Lily, the memory of Maria, the quiet dignity, and the sudden, miraculous hope. Each thunderous chord was a victory, each soaring melody a testament to the love that had sustained him. It was a confession. It was a proposal. It was the sound of two shattered souls finding their way back to wholeness. Together. The wealthy, powerful guests were mesmerized, many with tears openly streaming down their faces. They were not just listening to a piece of classical music. They were witnessing a raw, undeniable epic of the human heart. Isabella stood beside the piano, unmoving, her gaze locked on Elias. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but this time, it was a tear of pure, unadulterated joy. She was not just falling for him. She had already fallen, completely and irrevocably. When the final, triumphant chord echoed into silence, the room erupted. It was not polite applause. It was a roar of acclaim, a standing ovation that shook the crystal chandeliers. Elias's hands trembled as he lowered them from the keys. Isabella stepped forward and gently took his hand, helping him to his feet. She faced the audience, her hand held firmly in his. Elias's job at this company is no longer to clean our floors, she announced, her voice ringing with conviction. His job is to heal its soul, starting with mine. I am establishing the Richard Vance Memorial Arts Foundation, dedicated to bringing the healing power of music to children in need. And I can think of no one more qualified to lead it as its director than Elias. She turned to him, her eyes shining with love and a future he never dared to dream of. Your suffering is over, she whispered, for his ears only. Let me give you the world you deserve. It was the ultimate resolution, a complete and total salvation that addressed not just his financial woes, but his very station in life, elevating him to her side. As her equal, her partner, her hero. 1 year later, the relentless pounding of city rain had been replaced by the gentle golden glow of a late afternoon sun. Light streamed through the large bay windows of a warm, inviting home filled not with ornate, cold marble, but with comfortable furniture, colorful paintings, and the sound of laughter. In the garden outside, a little girl with bright, curious eyes and rosy cheeks chased a butterfly, her laughter as clear and musical as a wind chime. It was Lily, healthy, vibrant, and full of life. The fog had lifted completely. Inside, the soft, lyrical notes of a Chopin waltz drifted through the house. At a beautiful upright piano, the same kind his Maria had once owned, Elias sat with Lily on his lap, his large, gentle hands guiding her small fingers over the keys. Like this, he said softly, his voice full of a peaceful, easy joy. Let the music tell a story. Isabella stood in the doorway of the living room, leaning against the frame, watching them. The severe, impeccably tailored suits were gone, replaced by a soft, comfortable sweater. The haunted, weary look in her eyes had vanished, replaced by a deep, unwavering serenity. She was no longer a queen in an ivory tower, but a woman at home, surrounded by a love so profound it was a tangible presence in the room. This was her epilogue, her happily ever after. Elias looked up and saw her there, and the smile that spread across his face was one of pure, unadulterated love. He had found not just security, but a sanctuary. He was no longer a virtuous sufferer, but a cherished husband and father. She was no longer a hidden savior, but a woman healed and made whole by the very man she had sought to rescue. Their shared grief had blossomed into a shared joy. The silence that had once haunted them both was now filled with music, laughter, and the quiet, steady rhythm of two hearts beating as one. He had played Chopin for her, and she had fallen. And in doing so, she had caught him, and they had built a new life together, a life where kindness was the currency, and love was the ultimate reward. They were home. This story is a testament to the quiet power that lies within every one of us. It is a fable of how a single, selfless act of kindness, offered without any expectation of reward, can create ripples that change the very fabric of our lives. Elias, a man with nothing but a pure heart, offered a moment of comfort to a stranger and, in doing so, unlocked a future he could never have imagined. Isabella, a woman with everything but happiness, was saved not by her wealth or power, but by the raw, honest beauty of one man's soul. It reminds us that behind every face, whether it's a CEO in a skyscraper or a janitor in a hallway, there is a human heart with its own stories of sorrow and its own capacity for incredible love. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe in the power of compassion and the possibility of miracles, then please help us share this message. The world can often feel like a cold and unforgiving place, but stories like this remind us of the warmth and light that we are all capable of creating. Your engagement helps us continue to bring these soul-stirring narratives to life, spreading a little bit of hope with every view. We pour our hearts into creating these inspiring tales for you. To ensure you don't miss out on our next heartwarming story, please like this video, share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. Your support means the world to us. We'll see you in the next one.